welcome back to Crypto Bits. I'm your host, Brittany, and today we have Wuckert Jr. joining us once again. Hello, Kurt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Brittany. I'm happy to be here. I've survived my second bout of COVID-19 unscathed as far as I can tell, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about Bitcoin.
Yes, definitely. So it seems you've been awfully busy lately. We've got news coming out about like Gorilla Pool and everything happening with that. Do you think you could walk us through a little bit about what's happening with Gorilla Pool and like who's involved with it? And
so it's funny. Gorilla Pool was like many things in life, a happy accident. So it actually starts with the Gorilla DAO. So for people that don't know what a DAO is, it's a decentralized autonomous organization, which is sort of a fancy way of saying like a sort of a civic organization that's run a little bit like a non-for-profit corporation, kind of. If somebody who's familiar with like a church government might be much more comfortable with the way that a DAO is. Like there are people who vote, you vote relative to the amount of stake that you have, and you make managerial decisions for the group as a whole, and you're welcome to come or leave as you please. So it's just like a governance structure. About maybe 9 months ago, the DAO was created, very quickly raised a little over 100 grand in just in membership tokens. And then with that 100 grand, the apes, as we call them, vote on what they're going to do with the money that they have. And I think a lot of people weren't really sure what to do. And the DAO did do some interesting things initially, but it was mostly about like trimmings on how to manage the DAO itself. And I had this idea like, hey guys, with 100 grand, we could launch a mining pool. And wouldn't it be cool if the Gorilla DAO created the Gorilla Pool and we became an honest node on the network and you know, provide proof of work and show the network as a whole that, hey, we're not just a club or, you know, looking to do goofy stuff. Like we want to have some real influence over Bitcoin and all of that. So it passed. And then we didn't do much with it again. Like we built a little bit of node infrastructure. One of the apes, he goes by Root is his handle, was running some nodes and stuff anyway. So he was like, you know, yeah, let's see what we can do with it. And we tried some open source pool software and things, and it was not great. And so then, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, we had been talking about it and trying to decide what to do. And ultimately we started vetting commercial pool software and figuring out what the costs were and what the perks were for going one direction versus another. And we ultimately decided on which pool software we wanted to use. We made a proposal, spent a not insignificant amount of money buying the pool software, implementing it, like professionalizing our nodes and that kind of thing. And ultimately, we launched this pool and said, okay, this looks like it should work, but we don't know. And we also don't have any hash power. So we had to ask people out on Twitter, basically, and across the DAO and stuff like, hey, if you have a miner and you're mining with, you know, via BTC or with SV Pool or whatever, like, can you push a little bit of hash power over to Gorilla Pool? We want to see if we've even done it right.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we mined a 43 megabyte block. And we were like, I mean, we were screaming excited. Like it was just like, oh my God, we did it. Like, we can't believe this. And then ultimately we've just like, at this point, we've got about 4 petahash of power, which is about 1% of the hash power on the network. We are the number 8 miner on BSV by total hash rate, but we mine more blocks than, or we mine more like transactions and we make more money actually than, some like 3 or 4 of the miners that are above us in total hash rate. So we're trying to dial things in and do some really special stuff and really push the limits of Bitcoin, because I'm kind of a weird Bitcoin theorist. And so I've had some ideas like, hey, let's try to do X, Y, and Z. And Root, who has become a good friend now, I love working with him. He's happy to go bonkers or go bananas, I guess I should say, and try weird stuff. So honestly, it's 99% me and him goofing around, and whatever, doing a little bit of marketing, doing a little bit of sales. He's handling most of the technical stuff. And then he and I kind of tag team on like, hey, we have a prospective client who wants to send us really weird transactions. Like, let's work this out. But it's ultimately for the benefit of the DAO. So if we ever figure out how to make a profit, it will be good for the DAO. Because we don't have any hash power that's owned by the pool, basically 99% of the money that comes in immediately goes out to the people that are hashing. So if you wanted to earn, like if you wanted to join the pool, like go buy yourself an ant miner, point it at the pool, and you'll start making more money than we're making. And that's potentially fun.
You're over here like mad scientisting it up, and I love it.
Yep.
So I'm excited to see where you're taking this. I think it's good for I think it's good for the space for there to be a little bit more competition.
Yes.
Because as I've understood things, Tal has been kind of leading the charge in terms, sorry, that's my kids, of mining operations on BSV. And like I said, it's important to have that competition in the market so that it's not so one-sided, I guess, so to speak. But, and that's not to be critical of Tal or anything, but there's been like, on Volt, for instance, we were seeing a lot of rejected transactions, and then we were seeing a lot of, I think at one point, Tal was even kind of stepping on Gorilla Pool's proverbial toes, if I'm not mistaken.
Not really. I mean, not intentionally, anyways. Right. I think there's been a little bit of misunderstanding, and the reason is you kind of don't understand how the network works really, really deeply. It's like being a race car, fan versus a race car driver. Like they have a very different experience with what it's like to be in the race car industry, right? So once you've actually driven the car, you can start to give feedback and really understand, like, this is how the car works. This is how the track works. This is how it works when it's a little bit wet outside. Like when you're really pushing the limits, you start to see, you start to actually find those limitations for yourself. And when we find them, and this started on Twitter because we got orphaned a couple of times that I was not expecting, and I knew it was possible to be orphaned, obviously, like that this is how Bitcoin works, but our orphan rate was like, we were getting orphaned like twice a day, which is a big financial kick in the shorts because we still have to pay hash power. The people that are mining still get paid, and the pool's taking the hit. And we didn't have any money, so it was like, shoot, like, and every time it seemed like it was Tal that was orphaning us. So it was like, okay, and I mean, and that makes sense because they're the largest hasher. Like they are building more blocks than anybody else,
right?
And so we would just say that, like, shoot, Tal orphaned us, and they built a different block. And then some people started to come in like, hey, don't go criticizing Tal. And to me, I was like, oh, well, I'm not, first of all, I like the people at Tal. Yeah. It's like, I'm just talking about network conditions, like I don't hate, if you're like a sports fan or something, like I don't hate the other team,
right?
Like they're there to compete with us. And so, like, this is a good thing. Like, I'm irritated that we lost, obviously, but I don't wish we could like murder the other team or something. Right. So I think people need to, realize, and maybe it's me. I tend to use strong language in general. And then I assume people are like, people know me. They know I'm their friend, Then I get private messages are like, hey, Kurt, are we, are we not friends anymore? I'm like, no. Sorry. Like, but yeah, so Tal, just by their nature, that they're the largest hasher on the network, they're innately conservative because they need to be. They need to be the ones that are maintaining the standard, and they set the standard by virtue of the fact that they have the strongest signal on the network. It's up to them to set, like, this is what we think is appropriate at this time based on market conditions. And like you mentioned, token swap, these sensible tokens are big and new and weird. And they were not accepted by Tal's policy limits, which is they blazed new paths. Like this should be expected,
right?
But Gorilla Pool said, "Oh, we'll up our limits. Like we'll accept your transactions, no problem." So we just started doing it, and then it started to turn into like, a Robin Hood thing. It was like, Gorilla Pool's going to do the right thing, and Tal, sucks. And I'm just like, no. Like we need Tal to accept our block, so please don't piss them off on our behalf. So But yeah, so anyways, we're excited to do that. Like, we want people to come to us with weird problems that they need solved. Like, we are here to push those limits. But by all means, I want Towel to be a successful company. I want, in fact, everybody that's mining BSV, there's a lot of little pools too that, like, we want them to succeed. We want all the actors. The people that are mining BSV today are visionaries and they're heroes. And we want them to succeed. We just want to succeed with them. And if we can be a leader, if we can show, like, hey, we broke a world record here, we'll share with you how we did it. You know, like,
Right.
here's our settings, here's our node settings, here's how we managed our pool. Like, let's work together. Like, we need BSV to succeed, and we're here to help. So, and I say we very loosely because I'm basically just doing, like, advocacy, which is all I ever do in BSV anyways. Like, I'm advocating for Gorilla Pool, and, you know, granted, I'm on the inside a little bit, but I'm certainly not steering the node or anything like that either. So.
Right. Well, that kind of brings me to my next 2 points, right? Is that it feels like coordination between miners and, like, node software devs has been kind of poor. So how do you think that we could go about streamlining the process a little bit better?
More than anything, it's cultural. We've inherited a lot of weird post-traumatic stress from the whole Bitcoin civil war, and who's actually in charge of consensus. Does proof of work determine everything, or does there need to be leadership from the software developers? Like, who initiates change, who initiates governance, and a bunch of other stuff on Bitcoin. So we have a lot of weird baggage, and depending where you came from or how recently you've become a Bitcoiner, like, this can be a weird thing. Like, somebody like Steve Shatters has been a Bitcoin developer since, like, 2011.
Right.
And I mean, a serious one. Like, he's committed a lot
Right.
of code to Bitcoin over the last 10 years. And so for him, like, he watched new people come in, they're intelligent, they're good software devs, like, that's an exciting thing. And then all of a sudden they blindside you with, well, I think Bitcoin should do this and that. And the problem is that people like, you know, you and me, or the typical fan on Twitter or whatever, you know, your Bitcoin investor, they don't understand. They don't understand the nuance of, first of all, the software, and then how the software interacts with the general rule set, like the philosophical, what is Bitcoin? What is Bitcoin's governance? What is Bitcoin's purpose? And that's expressed in software. And unfortunately, there's only a very small number of people that can look at a million lines of C++ and say, oh, I understand what this is doing economically and philosophically and all this different stuff.
Right.
So that role is going to be innately strained in much the same way that if, I guess I'm going to mention church again here. If you were to, you know, imagine you've been a Christian for a year in your life, and then you're going to go sit down with, like, you know, some deacon or whatever who's a PhD in theology and has read the Bible in 6 languages, like all of the source languages. Like, you're going to have a very different conversation with that person about, like, well, who is Jesus and why does that matter? You know, like
Right.
these are things that, like, you may not be prepared to have the proper conversation. And it's okay to be ignorant, but then the ignorant shouldn't be involved in governance. But then you have the problem of corruption in the people that are capable, which is why we've got, you know, 500 denominations that are Christians too. You know, like, we disagree fundamentally on the way this word was translated, and, you know, and all of this different, and it's exactly the same thing in Bitcoin. So, you know,
I didn't mean to cut you off, but if we dumb down, or at least if the minor default settings were a little bit better, I feel like there wouldn't need to be this much coordination.
Maybe. I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's like passive versus active everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just recently bought a new car.
Okay.
And it's 2021, and I hate it. And I hate it because it automatically brakes for me if I'm following too closely. Or if I change, like, I kind of drive like a maniac, and it's because I love to drive.
And what'd you get? I have to ask.
It's a damn Honda Pilot because I've got kids.
Right.
And I'm used to, you know, I used to drive stick shift. I always had hatchback Volkswagens, and I would, you know, get the computer and, like, take all the governors off of it and just soup the thing up and drive like a lunatic. And so for me, it's like, I want to weave and all of that. Like, that's how I want to drive. I want to drive like a lunatic, and this car will not let me. And so that is a default setting on this Honda that I just want to shoot the car almost every time I drive it. And it's a very similar thing with the node settings, that essentially the node team can do one of two things. They can set default settings to a place that is safe and allow some, ignorant ape like myself to connect to the network. And I'm not going to break anything if I don't tinker with any of those settings. Like, it's going to work. The other thing that they could do is don't put any limits on it. Like, hey, you download this node's not going to have any limits, and you're going to get orphaned if you try to do anything with it without being very active and dialing in your own policy settings all the way down the list. I would, because I'm that kind of guy, I would say, yeah, do it like that. I don't want anybody to try to run a node if they're not really ready to run the node, right? But, but someone from his position, like, he doesn't want the network to be splintering because a bunch of idiots downloaded the thing and accidentally created a bunch of hard forks and whatever else. So it's a decision to be made, and it's a difficult one because the node team sort of bears this on their shoulders. So I certainly don't want their job, and I don't blame them necessarily for the decisions that they make. Sometimes, I have my criticisms and I'll express them, but that's a tough one. That's not a pair of shoes that I want to wear necessarily.
I hear you. Well, so recently the Bitcoin Association released a new update, the 1.0.9. Can you elaborate on some of the new features introduced in the update and kind of the seemingly negative connotations the upgrade itself brings? I mean,
yeah, there's a lot there. I haven't given myself the opportunity to sit and digest all of what it all means. Now, I do not have a problem necessarily. The big one is freezing transactions. Like, what does that mean, right?
Right.
From a policy standpoint, I think that a miner should be able to set their own policy settings and nuke a transaction. Like, if I have some pedophiles transaction in my mempool, I want to be able to say, you know what, screw this guy. Like, I'm going to lock this, and I'm going to tell it over the peer-to-peer network. Like, hey, this is this prick's transaction, and we're not mining it, and maybe you shouldn't either, but you make the decision.
Right.
I like that. That is a good thing. But it should be a minor policy, in my opinion. The way that it's done is it's a consensus level thing, and what that means is whoever makes that decision, if you're the largest guy on the network, and if I don't want to, maybe I don't care, maybe I'm whatever, like, maybe I disagree with the politics of why a transaction was frozen. And, if I'm running a node in a pool or whatever else, and I say, you know what, I do want to mine that shouldn't necessarily fork me off the network. There should be a micro hash war, just like every block is a hash war, really. And now it's become, okay, if you disagree with the largest proof of work on which transactions are frozen, you are automatically forked off the network. Now, we haven't seen it yet. This is a new piece of software. I don't know exactly how this all plays out in practice or exactly what this is for, but I don't love that it's a consensus level thing. It's also, I need to really look at it myself, like go line for line through the code myself and see, like, how is this done? I've heard a couple people say, well, isn't this essentially a soft fork? And it could be, but I haven't had the time to drill into it myself. I also really, really dislike soft forks. So if it's the case that this is how it's implemented, I would also not like it for my own philosophical reasons. I think soft forks undermine consensus personally. So, but like I said, I haven't taken a real close look at it, but I don't love it. There are ways to do what is being done at a policy level rather than at the consensus level, and I would prefer that it was done that way. However, I'm not necessarily. I've seen some people immediately like, well, time to go to war. And I'm always, I'm the guy that likes to sit at the negotiating table as long as possible.
Right.
And mostly because I'm really good at war. So I don't want to have to kill people that I liked last week, but
right.
It's unfortunate. A couple of things. The most important thing in my opinion is to not split. I do not like, we don't have anywhere near the the market dominance or anything to say, well, we can deal with splitting a certain portion of the community off because they disagree over
I agree.
a few lines of code. So if there's a way to have this conversation that is healthy and productive and does the best thing for BSV, like that's what I'm here for. If that can't happen, then I would really, really hate to see people have to choose sides and everything else. So hoping that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I would kind of worry about a scenario like that happening right now, just because there does seem to be quite a bit of conflict. I mean, there's so many different moving parts to, like, my next question, for example. It seems like we're having trouble gaining momentum in adopters in BSV. I mean, obviously that's been a challenge the entire time, but I feel like a lot of the adoption issue is due to the price, right? Everybody's more or less going to want to speculate on price. And then developers are kind of shying away from BSV somewhat and choosing more or less problem-ish blockchains. And then, of course, we've been having a little bit of issues with the miners. So what do you think we're needing more of exactly to help BSV flourish? Is it adopters, developers, miners, or is there some bigger picture that I'm missing here?
That's a tough one. I mean, we're exploring new territory with blockchains in general. Yeah. I mean, we've had Bitcoin for 12 years now, and nobody's used it for anything except for gambling, almost exclusively. And so BSV is trying to resurrect this notion that Bitcoin was always intended to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash, and then it can do all of this disruption in internet commerce in a million different ways: smart contracts and tokens and just simple payments and whatever else. And so there's a lot of levels of exploring that we're doing. Like this is like most of the people that first decided to go to California died on the way, right? So
dysentery.
Yes, and or whatever. Like, we didn't realize there was a mountain range there, and we all froze to death. And it's just like that's what it's like being an explorer, unfortunately. But it also makes for like really good history. We still read about these people 150 years later in grade school, and I hope that if we're successful here, that we get to be those people that the kids read about in school in a generation. But it is also totally possible that we fail because the market just wasn't ready. Right. And I'll tell a brief story. The founder of AOL, actually, his first business was essentially Netflix for video games.
Interesting.
Should have been successful, right?
Right.
The problem is that he founded it in 1982. And the only video game system was the Atari, and there just weren't that many players, and there wasn't a great distribution system. And so all of their customer service had to be done by telephone. And so he had to invest in call centers, and everything had to be, hey, I would like to order, Space Invaders or whatever. And then they'd have to ship it in the mail and all this different stuff. And the business ultimately failed. But it ultimately failed using the business model of one of the most successful businesses of the last 15 years, Netflix. And so he realized, okay, I was way too early. We needed more infrastructure first. We needed to teach people how to use electronics better. And this is what led to him creating America Online, which today is a totally obsolete model, but it was a very necessary stepping stone in the adoption of the internet in general. And so some of these lessons could absolutely be that way. Like, we could lose, BSV could die. Like this is a possible future here. But ultimately, the lessons that we are teaching and the lessons that we are learning, they can be repurposed in such a way. Like even just like the UTXO model of the data set, like it's just a lot better than the way Ethereum does it. And Ethereum cannot scale, and anything that's based on Ethereum cannot scale. Bitcoin can scale. And if the only thing we've taught the world is that if you use the Bitcoin protocol and you implement it properly, you can scale to be a global monetary network for the management of data and tokens and business and everything else. That's a huge thing that we've done, even if we don't get the benefit from it, which I would really hate personally. But we need to be prepared for all possible futures, and that is a possible future.
Well, one of the things that concerns me is this push that we've been everybody's been involved in, and like getting BSV kind of delisted and everything else. I feel like I feel like it's a double-edged sword. Whereas in one aspect, it's kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because it then becomes harder to purchase BSV for people
Yep.
that actually want to. And then that's going to make it so that there's not liquidity being pumped in and enough
Yep.
to be able to raise the price. And then on the other side of that, of course, if we don't, then it's just going to continue to get shorted anyway, and then it's going to keep driving the price down.
Yep.
So it's you know, at what point should we be worried about the price? I mean, does the price even, is it something that we should be worried about at all, or does it even matter because it's like it's going to work regardless of what the price is at?
I have a tendency to feel like we are going to win regardless of how powerful our enemies are, because our enemies are ultimately foolish about how disruptive and how powerful the technology is. We've seen the suppression of superior technology in business forever. We see it in business all the time still, and it's been like this for hundreds of years. It's been much more prevalent after the rise of industry and things like that. Like, oh, you've come up with this incredible technique. I mean, this is what preceded the creation of like communism and labor unions and things. Like labor unions were, hey, you can't have a machine replace all these workers. What are they going to do? You know, and so they try to suppress the technology in order to keep people swinging hammers and working in coal mines and doing all the stuff that we largely have machines do today. And so first of all, we should expect this. We should expect attacks from the incumbents. And that's really what it is. Like I bring up the MasterCard conspiracy, as people call it, but they're the payments giant. So why wouldn't they try to stop us from disrupting the payments industry? We should have expected this from day one. And when people tell me, oh, Kurt, that's just unreasonable, it's like, just follow the money. Like you can Google for 10 minutes and see MasterCard setting up incubators and VC and all these things to take over all of the Bitcoin infrastructure that they could. And they've been very successful at that. And it has made it that they have changed the narrative of Bitcoin from being a disruptive payments technology. And largely people are like, oh, this is investment. You should have it on your books. And that's what it's for. And that's great for MasterCard. Like whoever came up with that strategy deserves a raise, and they've done quite well for themselves at MasterCard. Congrats to them. I don't hate the competitors on the field. They give me someone to play against, right? So this is important for us to embrace the competition. Like I don't want to just bulldoze everybody and be, you know, masters of the universe because everybody sucked at competing with me. You know, like if I'm a warrior king, I want to have beaten other people that would have been very viable warrior kings, right? And that's something that's worth talking about. So at the end of the day, like they're going to fight. They're going to fight us forever. We're never going to win. Like it's not just over, right? Like there's a reason that the nations of the world just have standing armies forever, right? Like it's because if we just celebrate like we won, somebody that's hungrier than us is just going to show up and eat our lunch too. So we should fight forever. We should expect to win big battles and lose big battles and realize the war is worth fighting, because what we're doing is we're creating new economic efficiency that nobody else can create because they don't have the tools. And if we can find those niches, and we are finding those niches where we give people a tool that cannot be created anywhere else, we will be successful in those places. And ultimately, the price of the coin should reflect the reality of economic demand for such a tool. Like the cost of a hammer should be relevant and relative to the construction industry and what people can build with a hammer. If we come up with some new way to utilize a hammer in the economy that creates more demand for hammers, the price of the hammer should go up. So that's exactly the same thing with Bitcoin. But if we're all just going to speculate, and if it's just like, well, shoot, if it was on Binance, we'd have more, you know, we'd have more volume and liquidity, and that would be and it would be good. Like I would like more volume and liquidity, but ultimately volume and liquidity are irrelevant to the real victory of BSV if we're not also doing real business with it. Like we need to be putting real commercial data on chain. We need to be making businesses more profitable with the tool than they would otherwise be. And if we don't do that, then, I don't even care about the price. Like if in 20 years, I'm super rich on BSV, but I'm not using BSV for anything in the real economy still, I will call that a loss.
Well, I guess it makes sense because, like one of my questions was, love Calvin. He's a great guy. Love him to pieces. But I watched all his tweets and everything. And I saw him post some tweets about like encouraging people to purchase BSV. And then, like the very next day coming out and being like, kind of implying that the price of BSV was going to get wrecked. And I'm like, I'm trying to understand, I really want to understand because I love Calvin. But it's been hard for me to wrap my head around. But the way you're explaining is like, okay, I mean, we know what's going on. We're getting attacked, and there's all these things happening. So
it's a journey. I mean, the first people that discovered oil, or the first people that discovered minerals that are used in industrial technology, didn't necessarily know how valuable they would be. So, I mean, it took a long time to build out the infrastructure to change into the industrial revolution that we are benefiting from today. And so Calvin's not wrong. Like everyone should have some BSV in their portfolio, even if it's one and it changes the world the way we think that we can and will, then one BSV is enough to to retire on. Or it fails and you lost $180 or whatever, like that's your risk profile. And he has a much bigger risk profile in BSV, let me tell you.
Absolutely.
So he's not exactly not putting his money where his mouth is either, and just telling other people to buy. Like Calvin is the largest venture partner with startups. He is probably one of the largest holders. Craig is potentially the largest holder in the world. We'll figure out at the end of November, it seems. But they're in it for the long haul. They believe in the vision, and the only place I would differ, I don't ever tell anybody to buy BSV. I don't tell people to buy anything. Like I never
That's kind of
want
where I'm at. Yeah.
It's investment advice, and it's like, I don't know, I might be an idiot. So like, let me die alone if I'm the fool. Like I love the technology, but I don't know anybody else's financial situation. Like if you spend $500 a week on like partying, like buy one BSV a week instead.
Absolutely.
Like, but I mean, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and barely making rent, like, sorry, you're not in a position to be a Bitcoin investor. So
absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
Well, all right. So let me look here. If miners are supposed to continue accepting the longest chain, but they have the ability or the capability of rolling back and fixing errors if they all decide to, outside of being court ordered, it would seem as if there would have to be a major catastrophic event that would need to take place in order for miners to agree to do a rollback. So in your opinion, what would that catastrophic scenario look like? Would it perhaps be something to do with the DAA or poor coding, or maybe something else entirely?
Well, actually, we've already seen this. We saw this in the double spend attacks. So the way that the previous double spend attack worked is that some group of miners it probably wasn't even miners. It was probably some assholes paying for nice hash. But what they did is they were mining a private chain on nodes that were not broadcasting the transactions to the network. This is a violation of Section 5 of the Bitcoin white paper about broadcasting your blocks as you find them. So this was a malicious attack. And what they did is they were building blocks until they were several blocks ahead of the valid chain. And then they allegedly contained double spends. I'm actually still of the opinion that maybe this didn't happen the way it's been reported that it happened, because no one has reported what hashes exist of double spends. So I could be right or wrong about it, but there is no proof out there that it did happen, at least not publicly. And so what they did is I think they probably double spent money that was in their own wallets. So they created a valid transaction, they reversed the valid transaction in a different block, and then they had this malicious chain that they were mining in private. And when it was longer and when they had more hash power and therefore more proof of work, then they broadcast this giant lump of blocks onto the public network, and they reorged like 80 blocks or 100 blocks or something. I don't remember now. But in that situation, malicious nodes are attacking the network, and they have the largest proof of work. So the software is like, oh, we're supposed to follow this chain because that's how it's programmed to function. You follow the longest chain with the most proof of work. But the longest chain with the most proof of work was malicious. And so what needed to happen is that the honest nodes of the network had to communicate with each other privately and say, hey, we all need to revert back to this block where we all agree that there is something valid, and we need to orphan the malicious chain. So you need to go into your node settings and you need to invalidate these blocks, and we all need to coordinate and do this together and then go forward from there. So we need to orphan these people, take away their money essentially, and make it an unsuccessful attack. And that's exactly what they did. People criticize that because they're like, wow, you can't just do that. Bitcoin's not supposed to be that way. And it's like, no, they broke a rule. They broke a rule of the protocol about broadcasting your blocks. This was an attack, and honest nodes are supposed to subvert attacks by coordinating with other honest nodes. This is the point, is that Bitcoin is not just pure math. It's not pure like, well, code is law and the node says this one's valid, even though there's, a double spend in there. That's not how things work.
It's an argument that I get into with a lot of BTC maxis all the time, is because like, for instance, at one point, Craig, I was watching some video or interview with Craig Wright, and he was talking about, there's a ton of nodes in the BTC network, but only about 8 of them control the majority of the hashing power. And yep. I get into so many fights with all these BT maxis because they're like, no, because every miner equals 1 vote, and that's how we do consensus. And I'm like, I have a real hard time trying to figure this out myself from a technical perspective. So do you think you could explain like how the node, like, I'm having a hard time understanding this myself, because when you think about it, you're thinking about miners, but like the node isn't the miner, or is it? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's.
I do. I understand what you're saying. So the way that the network has evolved, the difficulty adjustment makes it that you cannot mine a Bitcoin block on your laptop.
Right.
That's okay. This is Satoshi said this even before. So when he first put out the white paper, immediately it was criticisms. He started getting criticisms immediately. He had a couple of conversations private emails between himself and Mike Hearn, himself and Laszlo Heinz, Hal Finney, a few other guys, where they're asking him these questions, not in a, the way we do it on social media today, like here's why you're wrong and a Satanist, but the emails were people that were genuinely interested. Okay, how does this work? How do you picture this working? And Satoshi immediately, this is before a block was ever mined on Bitcoin, by the way, said, here's what's going to happen. Server farms are going to come up and they're going to outcompete your laptop, and they're probably going to run GPU rigs, and they're probably going to pool hash. And then ultimately all of the hashing will connect to one LAN, or connect into the LAN and connect to one endpoint, one node. And he's describing exactly how Bitcoin grew. And small blockers, the BTC people, will say, well, Satoshi didn't predict that the network could look the way that it was. It's like, no. He predicted it. He clearly designed it to function this way, and he told us that it was going to happen this way. So let's not act like Satoshi was blindsided by what Bitcoin has turned into at that level. I think he'd be furious. In fact, I believe he is furious about the way that BTC has evolved. But when you have a node, the node is doing a job, and what it's doing is it's connecting to other peers on the network, and it is proposing, if it's a mining node, it's proposing blocks to the other nodes, like, hey, will you build on our block, please? We believe this is a good and valid block, and you should trust us because of how much proof of work we put behind it. Now, that proof of work is coming from specialized equipment, but that specialized equipment is itself, it's just searching for a hash. That's all it's doing. It is trying to brute force the next hash that should be the valid Bitcoin hash of the next block. But we're all cooperating. Like, they're all part of that node, and they can switch, like they can go to any other node that they want. But here's the problem in BTC, that they act like, well, we have 80,000 nodes, and therefore, like, we can preserve the rule set no matter what. They're ignoring a few things. In order to preserve no matter what, if court orders are given to the 8 companies, and it is, as last I checked, this 8 companies control basically all the hash power in the world.
Right.
and they're all in US and UK jurisdiction, by the way. And this is also crucial, they are now more hash power in the United States than in any other country, by the way. So it used to be China until just a few months ago. Now the US is the biggest hash power provider in the world. So when we talk about like, oh, well, it's decentralized and we can be in jurisdictions that can get away from court orders. It's like,
Eight people doesn't make decentralization.
Right. Like go read up on the Ruby Ridge situation. Like the FBI will kill you, first of all. So like resist all you want, but the harder you resist, the harder the US government will push back. So just be aware of that. But ultimately, so what they talk about is our nodes, our non-mining nodes, hashers can point their hash power at our nodes if we're the ones maintaining BTC. And the fact of the matter is they are not coordinated. They are not connected enough to do any of that. So if court orders are sent out to the companies that control the hash power on BTC and they are told this transaction is invalid, we want you to freeze and move a transaction or somewhere else. I mean, if I'm, Riot Blockchain or Marathon Mining or shoot, at this point, even if I'm Bitmain, Antpool, for example, is owned by Bitmain via BTC. Who is their largest partner is Bitmain. BTC.com and BTC Top, who are their largest shareholders, is Bitmain. so like give a court order to Bitmain and say, you need to do this or you're under arrest. How's that sound? Well, the response is get on the phone and say, hey, Hypo Yang from via BTC, we're doing this, or goodbye, or we're literally shutting you off from the network. Now, what they say is we can fork off that portion of the network, but it's like, well, you can't fork off all of the hash power on the network, or you will also be forced to do a hard fork of your non-mining nodes in order to lower the difficulty, because the difficulty will drop so quickly that you will be incapable of finding a block. And if you can't find a block, that's what we call chain death on BTC. So there is no world where you would not be forced to have multiple hard forks to solve that problem. And as we have seen from the small blockers, if you hard fork anything, you are no longer Bitcoin in their opinion. And so they've boxed themselves into a cultural rule set that is based on their own culture. It's not based on the Bitcoin protocol, but it's based on what we have decided as a community. And there is no way around it. Like there is just a reality of the way that the law works and the way that jurisdiction works. And by all means, I'm a big libertarian. I would love to see government become less powerful and all of these different things, but you're not going to do it. I think Craig said it best. Like, don't go kick the gorilla in the nuts. Like this is not the way you win a battle, right? Like you need to make them obsolete by cooperating so much better, even with them and around them. I like to take the Daniel Krawitz position on it. He hopes every tyrant on earth is forced to become a miner in order to compete with the world. I can do business with people I hate. If we are all incentivized to do business on Bitcoin by all providing proof of work, or we get orphaned from the global economy, that's awesome. Every fascist prick on earth should be forced to say, okay, here's my block. Please don't orphan me. Like it makes them better. A proof of work system makes even the worst person on earth someone who you can cooperate with economically. And that's the real goal. This is what the BTC people do not understand. They don't understand their own network economics. They think they can be a sort of decentralized nation unto themselves. And they don't realize that they are not that persistent. They are not immune to jurisdiction. They live in places, and those places can shut them off, period. It just needs to be coordinated, and they are much better at coordinating against these people than those people are at coordinating. They can't even coordinate because they don't have identity. They don't know who's who. They're all using sock accounts. They're all behind Tor. If they all showed up in a room, they'd realize they all hated each other anyways.
Well, yeah, I think that answers a a couple of my big questions there.
I hope it does. I have a tendency to ramble, but
no, I love when you ramble because but speaking about court orders, I know there's no shortage of theories and opinions on the upcoming court case, right? But I had a question. Last time that we had an interview, you spoke about how Craig went to go and do the BBC interview and how that whole thing was just a big mess. And then, afterwards, Craig got doxxed and all of these other things. Yep. But I wanted to ask you, do you know what Craig's intention was? Did he plan to sign back then to prove he was Satoshi, or just victim of circumstance, the way it happened, he just didn't end up doing it? And then do you have
hang on one sec. It's an incredibly complicated story, and I have heard versions of it from people who I know were involved that are all a little bit different in different ways, and I think it's entirely based on the way it was perceived from their perspective. So I did an interview with Stefan Matthews, who is chairman at Enchain. He's the CEO of Tal today. He worked with Craig back when Craig was working on the white paper in 2006 and 2007 and things. Like they were colleagues. And so he ended up being involved. He saw the whole thing happen. He saw the signings and stuff with Gavin Andreessen and John Matonis, and he helped. I think I'm not supposed to say some of the other people that were shown, and then also trying to organize with some other serious Bitcoin influencers and stuff who said, no, I won't come to a signing. So there's some interesting stuff there, but what I think happened, and this is a Kurt theory, I have not confirmed all of this, but in 2014, we know that Satoshi's email finally got hard hacked. So the Satoshi at GMX, the original Satoshi email, the actual email hosting provider got hacked, and the hacker was able to take over Satoshi Nakamoto's email. Now, we don't know how much information was in Satoshi Nakamoto's email. We don't know if it completely doxed everything. And, maybe the entire story was hidden in the email, in the sent box and in the inbox. This is, think about all the things that you write in your private email over a decade, right? It's like, I don't even know. I don't know how much information they have on me now. So this was 2014. Now, the hacker posted to the P2P Foundation and a couple other Bitcoin Talk even. As I recall, he even threatened Thamos, who is the head moderator for Bitcoin Talk, and I think he had a role at Bitcoin.org at the time. And it was like, "Hey, pay me $25,000 in Bitcoin, or I'm gonna leak all of Satoshi's everything. Like I'm gonna dump all of his stuff on the dark web." And it sucked. That's scary, right? And he did it from Satoshi's email, and which gave him logins to all those other things. Satoshi's Bitcoin Talk account, Satoshi's P2P Foundation account, etc. So Satoshi saved his passwords in his emails, which tells you a little something about Satoshi's OPSEC. Maybe not. I wouldn't do that for security reasons, but Satoshi. So all of a sudden, within about 6 months, this is when Craig left his home. A few months later, he moved out of the country very quietly and did a bunch of things. He ended up being doxxed completely not long after. And so I think that those two things are connected. Craig was quiet. Craig was happy to come out in public and be Craig Wright, the Bitcoin guy. Like, hey, here's he had showed up at the Melbourne Bitcoin meetup and things like that. He allowed himself to be filmed. Like, hey, I'm Craig Wright. Here's all the stuff that I think Bitcoin can do, and I'd like to help do it. He was building a bank and stuff as well. He had this notion about a Bitcoin bank that he was putting together, and all that's well and good. He was happy to be Craig, and Satoshi's email got hacked. All of a sudden, Craig very quietly leaves the country. He's in the UK. He's living with. He's living under some umbrella in Calvin's empire and all of this stuff. And so from the inside, I have to ask myself, okay, why did Craig make that move? Why did Craig know the doxing was coming? Well, it could be because he knew that the Satoshi email got hacked. At some point, there was an information leak, and this is when people like I believe this is when Jimmy Wynn got hired, and this is ultimately Stefan was approached by Craig, and Craig saying, "I've been doxxed," and then Stefan connects Calvin and Craig, and it looks like Calvin basically said, "Hey, I've got you, man. Let's get you out of the country. You can stay at my place and whatever. We'll get all this figured out." And so this is when this media team was assembled to do this sort of 2015 BBC stuff, do the signings. Like, let's see if we can get John Matonis and Gavin Andreessen and these other people on our team and some of the other people who I haven't mentioned. It was like, hey, let's get all the Bitcoin influencers in here before whatever the doxing stuff happens. Like, let's get them and say, hey, we've been doxxed. We don't know how this is going to crash land. Craig is Satoshi. Here, he's going to prove it to you and whatever. What ended up happening is that there were issues with the trustees and the Tulip Trust. It is up to the trustees ultimately how the keys are managed. As I understand it, Craig was told at the last minute, like, no, we're not going to release the keys to you in order to do some of these things, like on the BBC specifically. It looks like there was Andrew O'Hagan, for as good of a journalist as he is, looks like he was very confused about the way things were handled, especially by another gentleman by the name of Robert McGregor. It just looks like there was a bunch of mismanagement and miscommunication in a few of the people, and it made some people get very uncomfortable. And then it basically made Andrew O'Hagan treat the whole thing like, I feel like I'm being scammed here. And so then he posited it as, I think this Craig guy is full of shit. And that kind of fed the narrative of, okay, well, then what happens next? Is he going to do this signing? And then it was, no, the signing's not valid, and here's why. And then it's just spiraled into all of, the whole fake Toshi narrative. It has precipitated a bunch of these lawsuits and all this different stuff. Long story short, it's a giant clusterfuck. And people take this as evidence that it is a scam. And I don't think that that's what it is at all. I think it was, he's one of the richest men in the world. He created the most disruptive technology in a generation, and there are people maliciously attacking him. He tried like hell to disappear, burning keys and burning evidence that he is Satoshi, and then all of a sudden somebody finds some irrefutable evidence and they're gonna blackmail him with it, or who knows? Maybe they're gonna show up at his house and kill his whole family, right?
Right.
I mean, if I was doxxed and people knew I had a million Bitcoins and everything else, like, what is my immediate thought? Like, okay, I am now a high value target. I'm not that hard to find. Somebody's going to kick my door in, take all my stuff and kill my family, or keep me hostage, or who knows what else other people are thinking, right? And so he goes into panic mode. And then people are like, okay, well, then prove you're Satoshi. It's like, well, I can't. Like, the evidence of me being Satoshi was very carefully destroyed for my own safety. And some prick dug into my stuff and found some piece of evidence that I forgot to delete or whatever else. And now I've been foisted into the media, and I'm forced to deal with it in this way. And then everybody's saying, well, if he can't prove it, and it's like, I didn't come out to claim I was Satoshi. You brought me into the spotlight and said, well, how could you be Satoshi? But here's this evidence and all this stuff. So it's like, Craig is very much a victim in the way that this was all handled. And people like Calvin and Stefan and Jimmy and a few other people saw the opportunity there and said, hey, we see very clearly what happened, and we're going to try to help you as best we can. And this is really how the band got together ultimately. But it's been a nightmare, and it's been a nightmare because the war against Bitcoin, the war against Satoshi is been perpetrated by very powerful, very malicious people, and then a lot of business interests that want Bitcoin plainly to fail. And so Satoshi's a huge threat to the powers that be in the blockchain space. And so I think, I don't remember the original point here, but ultimately it's been a lot of really junky circumstances that have made really, I mean, made victims of a lot of us, and it's rewarded or awarded the people who followed the mainstream narrative about BTC. You know, the people that are like, well, I'm just going to go along with whatever Greg Maxwell says. Those people have been handily rewarded financially for following Greg's vision instead of Satoshi's.
Well, and I thought it was really interesting. Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, I thought it was really interesting that like, what is her name? Craig's ex-wife actually had to get involved with the Ayre versus Craig case. And come to find out that he was basically just Ayre was just the executor of David's will, essentially. And he really had no business using the company to make, go after Craig with. And I know Joshua Hensley was making a comment the other day about how he thinks the case will come down to Ayre having to prove that there was some type of business connection between he and Craig. Was there some type of business there?
So there was W&K, right. And that was Dave and Craig's ex-wife's company. Right. She was involved too financially. She was a partner in that business. And so the contention is that Bitcoin or Satoshi was a asset of W&K. This is what Ayre's position is. And Craig's position is, no, W&K was our company that did what W&K did. And Satoshi Nakamoto is the character I've played for 20 years in trying to do financial disruption. And Craig contends that he paid Dave to work as a contractor on various aspects of Bitcoin, but that it was not a W&K thing. Now, we don't know. I mean, this is opinion. The truth of it could be completely lost to history forever. And that could just be the case. So we don't actually know how much involvement Dave had in Bitcoin. The way that Craig says it is that essentially he was disappointed in the fact that Dave did not do more, actually, that he was asked to do things for Bitcoin and basically didn't do them or didn't get them done, or he didn't like the way that they were handled. But it seems obvious that Dave probably also was editing some of the language in the posts, or maybe spoke in forums and stuff. Like he probably had a couple of logins as Satoshi himself, but we don't know. Like, we just plainly do not know. It's impossible, as far as I'm aware, to prove who did what.
I think I worded that a little bit incorrectly, just because when Reinhardt was in charge of the case, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Ayre brought forth some evidence, and then Craig was able to prove that it was doctored, and then it was, it was kind of just thrown out, and Craig has kind of acted out and misbehaved, so to speak, in court and everything. But it feels like, that other judge was being paid off in Ayre's favor, or at least had some shady connections. I mean, possibly.
Well, Judge Reinhardt, the history on him is he was a prosecutor against Jeffrey Epstein in the original Jeffrey Epstein case. And he switched from being the prosecutor in the case to being Epstein's defense attorney, which was very controversial at the time, especially because Epstein is himself also a small blocker BTC guy, was funding a lot of the developers in the background as well. So there are some connections that a real investigative journalist could probably have a very good time with if they dedicated themselves to it.
It's interesting. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts about the case? Do you think it's going to get pushed back again, or do you think we're going to actually see some real results this time?
I hate court personally. And I've been self-employed since I was 19. I've been in small claims court and I've been in big claims court, and like, court sucks. It is a drag. It is long. And sometimes for procedural reasons, the facts of the case don't ever make it out. So there are certainly people who are excited about court. I'm excited for it to be over. Yeah. But ultimately I'm not a big fan of the law aspect of this whole Craig Wright and BSV thing. It's interesting for historical reasons and everything. I love it, but its relevance to BSV, which is really the thing that I care about, right, is a totally different thing. But that's also separate to my personal relationship with Craig, and as somebody, I desire for him to have a victory because I like him as, I guess I can call him a friend. I have private relations with Craig, and we communicate a little bit, and I'm happy to have a drink with him and have a chat with him when we meet at CoinGeek conferences and things like that. But so I'm hoping for Craig, my friend, to do well. But ultimately, the court case stuff, I personally, I don't trust the courts. Like courts,
that's kind of where I'm at.
Courts fail,
right?
So he would disagree with. I mean, he probably wouldn't disagree with me on the point that the law it can be wrong, but rhetorically, he's been very into the idea of like, no, this needs to be solved in court for X, Y, and Z reasons, and I agree with his logic about it, but I don't necessarily agree that it's, I'm not necessarily bullish on it, I should say.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I worry about him because I'm like, I want to see him succeed as well, but I'm exactly like you. I'm not real. I don't have a lot of trust in the legal justice system. There's a lot of,
just the Reinhardt situation. It's
exactly.
Why was Reinhardt not recused because of his conflict of interest in the case? Like, he has a relationship with a very contentious aspect of the BTC infrastructure funding, and that's a big problem in my opinion. So like, is that a failure of the justice system? I would argue yes, but
well, even the new judge, recently refused to enforce Ayre bringing the hard drives and the memory sticks and everything to court.
Right,
so it seems
which seems right. It seems very bizarre. So yeah.
All right. Well, I think I think we could go ahead and start wrapping it up here, Kurt, but I do really appreciate you coming on and answering all my questions. As you're just a plethora of knowledge and information, and I appreciate
I do
you
my
sharing
best.
That
well, and thank you. So you're my first appearance in several weeks. So I am a fan of your work. I like what you're doing here in the space. I'm a fan of the whole Crypto Bits brand. I like your style. So thanks for having me, first of all, and thank you for being an independent voice and somebody that sees the value in BSV and wants to talk about it. It's what I keep hoping for. I keep hoping maybe I'm not crazy and other people will see how cool this is.
Absolutely.
and jump in. So thanks for being you. Thanks for having me. And see you soon. I'll be broadcasting from court, actually. So I'm going to be in Miami for the whole trial, doing as much media as I am allowed to do logistically with the court rules. Yeah. So I expect there to be some fireworks, and I'm going to keep it real. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you, Kurt. All right, everybody. Well, that is going to wrap it up for today's episode, but we'll see you next time.